Hello Mila, hello Jack. Hello everybody else who's watching and welcome to Storytime with Grandad. Today's book is from Paddington Bear and it is Paddington Minds the House. One morning Mr. and Mrs. Bird went out for the day and left Paddington to look after the house. "I shall wash up all the breakfast things while you are gone," he said, "and then if I have any time left over, I may do some spring cleaning." "Oh dear," said Mrs. Brown, "I don't like the sound of that." As soon as the others had gone, Paddington set to work. He washed all the breakfast cups and saucers and plates, and he put them in a rack to dry. Then he did the dusting, and after that he washed the dusters and the towels and hung them up to dry. When he'd finished hanging up the dusters and towels, he started making a special chocolate cake as a surprise for Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Bird when they got back. Paddington liked cooking, and he was soon busy mixing flour and cocoa and sugar and milk together in a large bowl. It wasn't until he put his paw in the mixture to make sure it tasted as it should that he saw he'd made a mess with the flour and cocoa. Worse still, the floor felt crunchy under his feet where he'd spilt some sugar, so he got the vacuum cleaner out. That was when his troubles started. In his haste to tidy up the kitchen, he put the hose on the wrong end of the cleaner by mistake, and instead of sucking, it blew. Paddington staggered back as all the old dust came out and rose into the air like a big black cloud. It landed everywhere, on the clean cups and saucers and plates, over the dusters and towels he'd hung up to dry, over the table and chairs and floor. It even landed on his cake mix. Paddington decided that it was a good thing he was making a chocolate cake. At least it wouldn't show the dirt. Paddington started work all over again. He washed the breakfast things, then he washed the dusters and the towels and hung them up to dry. And because the dusters were now wet, he thought he would use the vacuum cleaner to get rid of the dust. This time he made sure the tube was on the right end. Using the vacuum cleaner was much more fun, and Paddington spent some time trying to write his name in the dust on top of the table. It wasn't until he got as far as the letter D that he noticed that the mixing bowl was now empty. He stared at the end of the hose, wondering what to do next. Paddington wasn't the sort of bear to be beaten, and looking at the end of the hosepipe gave him an idea. What had happened once could happen again. He put the hose back on the wrong end of the cleaner and then stood back, waiting to see if the cake mix would get blown out. For a second or two, nothing came out, and he was about to poke a spoon down inside to see if that would help, when there was a loud rushing noise. One moment the kitchen was clean and shiny as a new pin. The next moment it looked as if it had been raining chocolate. Paddington gazed unhappily around the room. It was in a worse state than before. In fact, he couldn't remember ever having seen such a mess. He gave a deep sigh and for the third time that day set to work. He washed the breakfast things, then he washed the dusters and the towels and hung them up to dry. Then he scrubbed the floor and washed the walls and polished the table and chairs until it looked all as good as new. In fact, he cleaned everything except himself. But by then it was too late, for there was a ring at the front doorbell. "Paddington," cried Mrs. Brown, "whatever have you been up to? Are you all right? You're covered in spots." "Brown ones," said Mrs. Bird. Paddington looked at himself in the hall mirror and saw for the first time what a mess he was in. "I think I must have had a bad attack of of spring cleaning fever, Mrs. Bird," he said. Mrs. Bird hurried into the kitchen, but she had to admit that she had never seen it looking quite so clean. And she wondered why Paddington had got spots on his duffel coat, as well as on his whiskers. She didn't say anything. "I think," she said, "you had better go upstairs and have a nice hot bath." Paddington thought that was a very good idea. He felt tired after all his hard work. Afterwards, when he was safely tucked up in bed, Mrs. Brown brought him up his supper on a tray. "You're looking better already," she said. "The rest must be doing you good." "It isn't so much the spring cleaning that brings you out in spots, Mrs. Brown," said Paddington. "It's all the clearing up you have to do afterwards." The end. Goodbye, Mila. Goodbye, Jack. I'll see you soon. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.